The planet of Varkolis lay cloaked in ruin, its surface scarred by centuries of war and neglect. Smoke coiled from the shattered remains of industrial districts, drifting through a sky streaked with the color of rusted iron. Ash fell like a pale snow, settling over the broken remnants of machines and the bodies of those who had long since perished. Amidst this wasteland, a small detachment of warriors advanced cautiously, their ceramite armor scratched, dented, and streaked with the grime of countless battles. Each step echoed unnaturally across the ruins, as if the very ground remembered the violence that had occurred upon it. The air itself seemed heavy, charged with an invisible tension, and the soldiers felt a presence, something ancient and terrible, lurking just beyond the limits of perception. Their breaths came shallow, their nerves taut as tautened steel, as they approached the remnants of a structure that had once served as a hub of knowledge and power. The doors were massive, forged from unknown metals, engraved with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under the faint light of their lamps. Inside, the detachment discovered a hall of relics and technology long abandoned. Broken servitors lay scattered across the floor, their mechanical limbs twisted, cables fused with burned flesh. Sparks flickered intermittently from fractured power cores, casting grotesque shadows that danced across walls lined with ancient inscriptions. A hum, low and resonant, thrummed through the chamber, vibrating in the bones of the intruders. The sound was not mechanical, not wholly natural. It was the echo of something alive, something that had been asleep for countless centuries yet remained aware, waiting. The squad moved as one, weapons raised, senses sharpened by training and fear alike. At the center of the hall, concealed beneath layers of dust and arcane wards, they found the object of their mission, a sarcophagus forged from an alloy unknown, larger than any mortal could fully comprehend. Its surface shimmered faintly, etched with symbols that seemed to pulse with a hidden light, a language older than humanity itself. As they approached, the air thickened, and a chill swept through the hall, carrying with it the faintest echo of whispers, soft, unintelligible, yet heavy with meaning. The warriors hesitated as the sarcophagus began to react to their presence. A vibration rose from its base, subtle at first, then stronger, resonating in every bone, every fiber of their beings. Lights along the walls flickered in response, illuminating patterns of inscriptions that seemed to writhe and twist, almost alive. A presence stirred, vast and incomprehensible, filling the room with a gravity that demanded attention. Then, a voice, not spoken aloud, but heard in the mind, resonant and cold, echoed across the chamber. "They tried to forget me. They failed." The warriors staggered, some dropping to their knees as the weight of centuries pressed upon them. Their training did little to prepare them for the force before them. From within the sarcophagus, a figure emerged in a haze of greenish light, larger than any man, clad in armor that seemed fused with energy and fury. His features were both noble and terrifying, his eyes burning with a light that cut through shadow and fear alike. He moved with a grace and speed that defied comprehension, each step resonating with authority and judgment. He was not simply a warrior, he was a living instrument of power, sculpted by the Emperor, yet altered by time, betrayal, and erasure. The presence of the Primarch cast a weight over the room that was almost tangible. The squad felt their courage falter, replaced by awe and terror. This was a being whose existence had been stricken from all records, yet here he stood, undeniable and overwhelming. He raised a hand, and the room responded. Inscriptions glowed brighter, servitors stirred, their systems humming back to life. Sparks of energy danced along cables and metal, illuminating the massive chamber with eerie, shifting light. Every soldier felt the pull of his gaze, the sense that he knew not just who they were, but what they carried in their hearts, their fear,
their doubt, their loyalty. Some felt shame, others reverence, and all felt the weight of a truth that could unravel their understanding of the galaxy. Here was a son of the Emperor, one who had been erased, yet whose influence lingered like a shadow over time and space itself. As the detachment advanced further, the Primarch's presence seemed to warp reality around them. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, the walls of the chamber seemed to breathe, and the floor vibrated with the resonance of ancient power. Every step brought a mixture of horror and fascination. The soldiers were aware that they were witnessing history that never should have been seen. The tech priests accompanying them began their work to record the data, their hands trembling as they tapped into consoles and relays that had lain dormant for millennia. The Primarch did not speak, yet his intent was clear. He was an observer, a judge, a force awakened from slumber to measure the worth of those who dared intrude upon his domain. He moved closer to the sarcophagus, and the glow intensified, casting the chamber in a spectrum of unearthly light. Sparks leapt from broken servitors and flickered across inscriptions that seemed to tell the story of a life deliberately erased, of campaigns obliterated from memory, of victories and sacrifices the galaxy would never officially acknowledge. The soldiers' sense of time fractured as the chamber revealed its secrets. They saw visions projected from the sarcophagus, fleeting images of cities saved and destroyed, battles waged across alien worlds, legions of warriors moving in perfect coordination, and the alien architecture of enemy fortresses collapsing under impossible strategies. They felt the weight of every life lost and spared, the moral complexity of decisions made with the clarity of someone who saw the consequences before they occurred. Their hearts pounded as the chamber revealed the immensity of what had been lost, not only in flesh and blood, but in knowledge, in legacy, in the understanding of what it truly meant to wield power without compromise.
Suddenly, the chamber shuddered violently, as if reacting to the full presence of the Primarch. Sparks leapt in arcs across the room, illuminating glimpses of machinery fused with flesh, servitors reactivating, and inscriptions burning with energy. The squad instinctively raised their weapons, though no enemy appeared. Their fear was of the unknown, the force they could not touch, yet which could annihilate them in an instant. The Primarch's figure loomed larger, a combination of physical and metaphysical might, radiating a sense of absolute authority. His gaze swept over the warriors and the tech priests alike, and each one felt the simultaneous weight of reverence and terror. It was impossible to measure him, impossible to fully understand his presence. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every fiber of being was drawn to witness the unfolding reality of a Primarch who had been erased but never forgotten. As the detachment began to retreat, the chamber continued to hum with residual energy, the sarcophagus slowly dimming, yet still radiating a pulse that echoed in the minds of all present. The soldiers emerged from the ruins, carrying fragments of data and the overwhelming memory of what they had seen. Outside, the city of Varcolis seemed alive in response. Shadows shifted unnaturally, distant echoes of the past stirred, and the wind carried whispers that were half memory, half warning. The squad understood, without speaking, that they had glimpsed something the Imperium had fought to bury, and that their lives, and the galaxy, would never be the same. The Primarch's awakening was not merely a discovery, it was a confrontation with the consequences of erasure, the fragility of truth, and the power of one being capable of altering the destiny of entire worlds. By the end of the act, the warriors and the audience alike are left suspended in awe and fear. The horror is profound. This being existed, wrought chaos and salvation, and yet was systematically erased.
the atmosphere thick with tension, dread, and the unearthly presence of the Primarch leaves the stage set for the next act, where the story will delve into the life, campaigns, and moral complexity of the Primarch, revealing why history itself feared him and sought to forget his name.
Long before the shadows of Varkalis fell across its desolate plains, the lost Primarch had carved his existence into the galaxy in ways both magnificent and terrible. His campaigns were precise, swift, and often incomprehensible to even the most seasoned commanders. Entire worlds shifted under his hand, their fates sealed by decisions that blurred the line between genius and judgment. He did not seek glory, he sought results, often imposing outcomes that confounded allies and terrified enemies alike. On the industrial world of Tayloris, insurgent uprisings threatened to destabilize the sector. The lost Primarch arrived without warning, descending from the void in vessels that cast massive shadows over the burning cities. His legion, though smaller in number than the insurgent forces, moved with a coordination and speed that seemed almost prescient. Streets once choked with barricades and fire erupted under his assault, and his warriors struck like living extensions of his will. Enemy commanders, once confident in their strategies, were reduced to panic as the Primarch's presence warped the flow of battle. He appeared at every front at once, his strikes surgical and lethal, and yet, among the devastation, he preserved lives whose loss would have served no purpose beyond satisfying fear or hatred. Reports of the campaigns describe a figure of impossible scale and strength, moving faster than the eye could follow. He wielded weapons that seemed extensions of his body, each swing precise, each movement calculated to devastate without waste. Yet, even in combat, there was method and restraint. Civilian districts caught in crossfire were often spared, the enemy's forces isolated and neutralized with minimal collateral damage. Entire battalions fell in moments, not to overwhelming numbers, but to the sheer inevitability of his tactics. His presence reshaped strategy itself, forcing commanders to react to an entity whose understanding of war extended beyond simple numerics or positioning. Witnesses described his eyes as flames that burned through pretense, revealing fear, courage, and truth alike. Soldiers under his command fought with near religious devotion, aware that their actions were guided by someone whose judgment was absolute. Those who survived said the experience left them haunted. Battlefields became theaters not of chaos alone, but of calculated destiny, shaped entirely by the lost Primarch's will. His successes did not sit well with the Imperium. As victories mounted, so did unease among the High Lords of Terra. While other Primarchs could be contained within the structures of obedience and hierarchy, he challenged assumptions at every turn. He refused to follow orders that were strategically unsound or morally repugnant, redirecting campaigns when the cost to innocence threatened unnecessary loss. On liberated worlds, he allowed governors chosen for competence, not loyalty to the Imperium, to assume power. He exposed weaknesses in imperial doctrine, demonstrating that rigid adherence to protocol could cost lives and planetary resources alike. The High Lords interpreted these actions as dangerous independence. His victories, though undeniable, became inconvenient narratives. A Primarch capable of such discernment could not be trusted to remain within the bounds of the Imperium's control, and so efforts to erase his existence began even as his campaigns raged across star systems. The decisive campaign that cemented his erasure unfolded on Calor Prime. A coalition of alien warbands and human traitors had converged upon the planet, threatening annihilation. The lost Primarch arrived with a fraction of the forces he might have commanded, yet his strategy turned scarcity into advantage. His legion executed rapid redeployments across fractured terrain. Ambushes struck before the enemy realized their positions had been compromised, and war machines were employed in manners that defied conventional comprehension. Entire enemy units collapsed under coordinated strikes that combined brute force and tactical ingenuity, leaving commanders broken and disoriented. At the heart of the battle, the lost Primarch moved among his warriors, a towering figure whose presence both inspired and terrified. His decisions were swift and unyielding, balancing destruction and preservation in a calculus only he could perform. Civilians were shepherded to safety even as the enemy's forces were annihilated, and yet the scale of devastation around him reminded all who witnessed it that salvation often comes at unbearable cost. Even as he achieved victory, the High Lords intervened. Fleets were dispatched under the guise of reinforcement, but their true purpose was oversight and control. The lost Primarch, aware of the scrutiny, maneuvered to neutralize interference while maintaining his objectives. This delicate dance between obedience and autonomy defined his campaigns. His brilliance was both weapon and liability, for every triumph threatened to challenge the Imperium's accepted narrative. Records were rewritten as he left each world, credit given to lesser generals, victories obscured behind layers of bureaucracy. His legion, once a singular force devoted to his command, was disbanded or reassigned under new designations, its history erased to prevent the possibility of dissent or worship among future generations. Witnesses were silenced, codices altered, and yet fragments of his actions endured in scattered logs and whispered memories. These remnants, though incomplete, revealed a figure whose understanding of war, leadership, and morality surpassed even the most venerated figures of the Great Crusade. The lost Primarch's moral complexity became as significant as his tactical genius. On multiple occasions, he faced decisions that would have broken lesser minds: destroy a city to prevent future rebellion, or spare it and risk repeated insurrection; annihilate a traitor force entirely, or allow survivors as lessons to other worlds. He chose in ways that seemed cruel or impossible in the moment, yet each choice produced outcomes that safeguarded humanity on scales no one else could perceive. The soldiers who followed him were often horrified, yet they trusted him implicitly, aware that his reasoning extended far beyond their comprehension. Each campaign revealed the paradox of a being capable of unparalleled compassion and unspeakable violence, a creature whose existence forced those who witnessed him to confront the limits of obedience, morality, and the Imperium's rigid structures. In the mountains of Arctalis IV, he demonstrated both brilliance and terror in equal measure. The enemy had fortified the planet's primary city using ancient alien technology, creating defenses that no ordinary force could breach. The lost Primarch devised a multi-pronged assault, feinting attacks on one front while secretly maneuvering his forces through volcanic tunnels to strike at the heart of the defenses. Units of his legion moved as extensions of his will, executing impossible maneuvers with synchronicity that made their opponent's destruction inevitable. Enemy forces collapsed, their command structures annihilated, and yet the Primarch personally ensured the survival of innocents trapped within the city. His intervention reshaped the battlefield, demonstrating that war was not merely destruction, but an instrument of judgment wielded with precision and intelligence. Despite victories, unease among the High Lords intensified. The worlds he saved became loyal to him personally, rather than to Terra. Commanders and governors he left in power often acted independently, guided by his philosophy rather than imperial edict. The Imperium could not allow such independence, and the decision was made to erase him. Archives were altered, victories credited elsewhere, and the legions scattered beyond recognition. Yet fragments endured, inscriptions hidden within temples, whispers among the Mechanicus, memories preserved in the minds of a few who had truly seen him.
These remnants spoke of a figure who existed beyond bureaucracy, beyond control, and beyond the simple narratives the Imperium demanded. As campaigns progressed, the lost Primarch became a force of myth even during his life. Soldiers and civilians alike marveled at his presence, yet also feared it. His interventions combined both awe and horror, the salvation of entire worlds, the simultaneous destruction of enemies, and the moral certainty with which he acted created a dichotomy impossible to reconcile. His victories were impossible to ignore, yet the Imperium's insistence on obedience and conformity made him a threat greater than any alien foe. The weight of history itself seemed to bend around him, as if the galaxy recognized that his existence challenged everything previously accepted. The shadows of battles past lingered, a testament to the scale of his influence and the deliberate efforts of the Imperium to obliterate the memory of him from every record. Even as his campaigns became legends among those who had witnessed them, the lost Primarch's life remained a carefully concealed paradox, a being of overwhelming power, moral discernment, and strategic genius, simultaneously worshipped and feared. His victories saved worlds, yet the bureaucracy that sought to control humanity feared him more than any Xenos invasion. The erasure of his history was a silent war, fought across archives and codices, yet no act could fully contain the truth of his existence. Soldiers who had served under him remembered his voice, his presence, his judgment, and the galaxy, despite the Imperium's best efforts, could not fully forget the Primarch who had moved its stars and shaped its destiny beyond any other.
The skies above Calor Prime were rent with fire and lightning, the planet trembling under the weight of approaching doom. Warp storms churned across the upper atmosphere, their violent energy illuminating the battle-hardened surface below in flickering, unnatural hues. Cities had been evacuated, though the chaos of conflict left pockets of survivors scattered across the ruins. The enemy, a coalition of Xenos warbands and human traitors, had fortified the planetary capital, transforming it into a labyrinth of spires, barricades, and energy shields. From orbit, the fleet of the lost Primarch descended, ships cutting through storms as though the atmosphere itself sought to repel them. Aboard the lead vessel, he observed the battlefield in silence. His armor, etched with sigils and scars from countless campaigns, shimmered faintly with latent energy. Every strategy, every movement, every eventuality had been calculated, yet he remained calm. His presence radiated authority so absolute that even the battle brothers around him felt their own pulse synchronized to the rhythm of his awareness. The moment his boots touched the surface, the air itself seemed to respond. Explosions erupted simultaneously across enemy positions, though no conventional strike had yet been ordered. He had anticipated every minefield, every ambush, every defensive turret. His legion moved as one with him, striking with precision that blurred the line between soldier and weapon. Entire battalions of enemy forces collapsed in seconds, disoriented by assaults that seemed impossible to predict or counter. In the center of the chaos, he became a whirlwind of motion, towering over the battlefield, weapons swinging, armor flashing, his movements almost too fast to perceive. Where he stepped, craters formed. Where he raised his hand, energy flared and shattered constructs. The enemy, faced with the living embodiment of martial perfection, faltered and fled in panic. Their war machines, once symbols of dominance, were rendered inert under strategies they could not comprehend, falling one by one as if the planet itself conspired against them. Yet the scale of destruction was immense. Buildings collapsed, bridges crumbled, and the roar of artillery combined with the screaming winds of warp storms to create a symphony of chaos. Civilians, driven from their homes, found themselves witnesses to a force beyond comprehension. Even soldiers loyal to the Imperium, deployed to reinforce the Primarch's strike, trembled before him.
The aura of power radiating from his form distorted perception. It was impossible to tell where strategy ended and supernatural influence began. Every strike he executed was measured, every action deliberate, yet the devastation was staggering. Enemy commanders, desperate to regroup, found themselves anticipating the wrong moves at every turn, their own calculations undermined by a mind capable of seeing the consequences of every decision before they were made. The battlefield became a theater of inevitability. No maneuver could survive, no counterattack succeed when faced with the Primarch's singular mastery of war.
Amid the carnage, he paused at the city's central plaza. There, the enemy had concentrated their forces in a final attempt to repel him, constructing layered defensive emplacements protected by alien technology. He raised a hand, and the ground trembled in response. Energy rippled from the surface, destabilizing the enemy's fortifications. The walls groaned, crackling with fractures as his aura of command manipulated not just his forces, but the battlefield itself. Legionaries flowed through breaches as if guided by instinct and impossible foresight, cutting down foes who had believed themselves untouchable. The Primarch's focus never wavered. He moved as the living embodiment of judgment, selecting targets with precision, predicting outcomes with ruthless efficiency. Each enemy strike that reached him was countered, neutralized, or turned against its origin in ways that left survivors unable to comprehend the mechanics of their defeat. The sky above mirrored the destruction below. Warp lightning tore across the horizon, intersecting with the fire of falling artillery, creating jagged columns of light and shadow. Ships from the enemy coalition attempted orbital strikes, but his presence seemed to anticipate even their trajectories. Projectiles disintegrated mid-flight, shields collapsed, and vessels erupted in fireballs that painted the atmosphere in hues of red and gold. The battlefield itself became an extension of his will, every explosion, collapse, and movement choreographed to maximize efficiency and minimize unnecessary loss of life among innocents. Yet for all his control, the scale of chaos was awe-inspiring. Trenches collapsed, cities shook, and the screams of soldiers and creatures alike echoed through ruined streets and canyons, mingling with the roar of engines, the flash of energy weapons, and the unnatural hum of warp interference. Even as victory approached, the horror of the battle became apparent. Entire sections of the enemy forces were annihilated in moments, their survival impossible, yet some persisted, driven by desperation and fear. Mutated beasts, Xenos monstrosities, and corrupted war machines surged forward, forcing the Primarch and his legion to adapt instantly. He met each threat with an overwhelming strength and uncanny intellect, striking with weapons that tore through metal and flesh alike, while coordinating the movements of his legion with subtle gestures and glances. Soldiers who witnessed him in combat described moments of impossible simultaneity. He fought multiple opponents across several locations, appeared to teleport between positions, and yet remained fully in control of every outcome. The enemy's morale shattered, their chains of command broken, and still he advanced with relentless precision. The heart of the battle revealed the full horror of his genius. Enemy commanders, realizing the inevitability of defeat, unleashed experimental weapons in a desperate gamble. Massive bombardments, psychic surges, and engineered plagues were hurled at him and his forces. Yet each strike was anticipated, each threat neutralized, often before it had fully manifested. The battlefield itself seemed to bend around his will. Structures fell away from his path, explosions redirected to avoid collateral damage, and enemies were drawn into traps that seemed orchestrated by an intelligence beyond mortal comprehension. Even the elements, the wind, the fire, the tremors of the planet, acted as extensions of his command, aligning to create openings and advantages where none should have existed. His strategy was both terrifying and beautiful, destruction and salvation entwined, a perfect balance of judgment and inevitability. At the climax, he stood atop the central bastion of the enemy's defenses, silhouetted against a sky ablaze with fire and lightning. From this vantage, the full scope of the battlefield was revealed. Shattered structures, fallen soldiers, fleeing enemies, and the remnants of alien technology smoking in defeat. He raised his hand once more, and the final bastion of opposition crumbled, not through conventional siege, but through the precision of his orchestration. Legionaries surged forward, sweeping away remnants, securing survivors, and consolidating the world's liberation in moments that had once seemed impossible. The Primarch's eyes scanned the horizon, calculating the remaining risks, adjusting deployments, and ensuring that no hidden threat could emerge. Even in this moment of victory, there was no celebration, no pride, only the cold, focused clarity of purpose that had guided every campaign, every battle, every decision in his life. The aftermath was both awe-inspiring and harrowing. Cities that had once teetered on the brink of destruction now stood intact, yet the echoes of carnage lingered. Streets were littered with debris, bodies, and remnants of alien war machines. Survivors emerged cautiously, uncertain whether salvation or further peril awaited them. The battlefield bore the imprint of a force unlike any other, precise, devastating, and morally inscrutable. Those who had faced him spoke of a terror that went beyond fear, a recognition of power that could not be resisted, a judgment that transcended human understanding. The planet itself seemed to remember the presence of the Primarch, the winds carrying faint whispers of command, the ground resonating with the echo of impossibly precise strikes, the atmosphere heavy with the residue of conflict and the unyielding imprint of his will. Even as the last pockets of resistance were extinguished, the Primarch's attention turned toward the broader galaxy. This battle, though decisive, was only one thread in the tapestry of history he had been erased from. The High Lord's attempts to remove him from memory could not negate his actions, could not erase the imprint of his judgment upon worlds and systems alike. As he departed Calor Prime, leaving behind survivors, rebuilt defenses, and the lingering sense of inevitability, the forces of the Imperium and his enemies alike understood that this Primarch's presence had altered the trajectory of countless lives. The attack had shaken not only the planet, but the perception of power, morality, and the consequences of actions that could neither be ignored nor fully comprehended. The remnants of Calor Prime smoldered beneath a sky bruised with fire and lingering warp storms. Smoke drifted across the plains where cities had once stood, and the winds carried ash that clung to armor and flesh alike. The lost Primarch stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, his figure towering against the dim glow of a dying sun. Around him, his legion regrouped, their movements disciplined, yet haunted by the scale of destruction they had enacted and witnessed. Even now, they could feel the echoes of their commander's presence shaping every decision, every placement, every strike. This was no mere victory. It was the reaffirmation of his vision, his understanding of war, and his mastery over events that others could not control. He surveyed the world with measured scrutiny, noting both what had survived and what had been lost, weighing each life and structure with the precision of someone who understood the consequences of every choice. His gaze then turned to the scattered survivors, the remnants of civilian populations and loyalist forces. Many had feared his arrival, uncertain whether he would bring salvation or annihilation. Yet in his presence they recognized a force of judgment and protection unlike any other. He moved among them with deliberate care, offering guidance, reassurance, and direction, his voice resonant with authority that demanded obedience and respect. Even in these moments of measured calm, however, there was an unspoken warning. The galaxy had witnessed his judgment, and the memory of it would endure, whether the Imperium acknowledged it or not.
Those who looked upon him understood that he existed outside the normal bounds of authority, a being whose actions could challenge doctrine, morality, and the very perception of power itself. While the battlefield was quieting, forces from the Imperium arrived, ships descending from orbit, carrying envoys and inquisitors sent to oversee the aftermath. They had not anticipated the scale of the victory, nor the power demonstrated by the lost Primarch. Their presence was cautious, eyes darting to measure the figure before them, wary of the force that had moved entire armies, reshaped planet, and exercised judgment beyond the capacity of mortals. The Primarch did not flinch, nor did he acknowledge their scrutiny overtly. His actions spoke for him. Orders were given, defenses established, and survivors directed to safe zones, all executed with a level of precision that demonstrated a superiority of mind, body, and strategy that could not be matched. Those who had been sent to monitor, influence, or control were reduced to observers, their authority meaningless in comparison to the command radiating from him.
Beneath the surface of this triumph lay a deeper revelation. The victories he achieved, the battles he orchestrated, and the populations he protected all carried knowledge that had been deliberately erased from the galaxy's records. Hidden in his strategy, in his commands, and in the memories of his legion were truths the Imperium feared. Truths about the weaknesses of sanctioned doctrine, the potential for independent judgment to save or destroy, and the fragility of history itself. Every action taken by the lost Primarch had consequences that reached far beyond the battlefield, rippling outward through sectors and systems that might never know his name, yet would forever bear the imprint of his decisions. Even as the Imperium sought to enforce silence, fragments of these events remained, scattered survivors, encrypted data slates, and whispers that could not be fully contained. The galaxy had seen the hand of a son of the Emperor, one who existed outside bureaucratic control, and the resonance of his influence endured. The Primarch then turned his attention to the legionaries who had fought by his side. Though scattered and reassigned under false designations, they carried within them the memory of command, judgment, and strategy that had no parallel. He moved among them, touching shoulders, meeting eyes, instilling understanding without the need for words. Each soldier internalized the lessons of the campaign, aware that their leader had not only fought battles, but had altered the way war itself could be conceived. The moral clarity, tactical brilliance, and unyielding authority of the lost Primarch became a standard impossible to ignore, and even in the absence of his name, those who had served under him would carry his legacy through actions, strategies, and whispered teachings. He was both a figure of salvation and a figure of terror. His presence ensured victory, yet the scale of his comprehension and control reminded all who served him that they were witnesses to power beyond their understanding. Across the galaxy, subtle shifts began to take place as the after-effects of the Calor Prime campaign rippled outward. Commanders began to question established doctrine, strategists reconsidered old calculations, and systems previously deemed lost were stabilized through unanticipated interventions that bore the unmistakable signature of the Primarch's design. Even as fleets far from the battlefield adjusted formations and strategies as though responding to an unseen influence, the Primarch had acted not merely in the immediate moment of battle, but with foresight that spanned worlds, systems, and political machinations. His genius was encoded in the galaxy itself, a lattice of influence and judgment invisible to those who relied solely on records and doctrine.
The Imperium's attempt to erase him could not fully succeed, for his legacy was embedded not in texts alone, but in actions, consequences, and the subtle shaping of events that would unfold long after he departed from immediate view.
As the days passed on Calor Prime, he remained vigilant. Intelligence of other threats reached him, scattered reports of Xenos activity, rebel uprisings, and forces seeking to exploit the Imperium's vulnerabilities. Each report was weighed and processed, adjustments made with precision that made the efforts of lesser commanders appear chaotic in comparison. The Primarch's understanding of strategy extended beyond war itself. He saw governance, loyalty, and survival as intertwined forces, each dependent upon the careful alignment of principle and action. Where others saw battles as isolated engagements, he perceived patterns, contingencies, and moral consequences spanning decades. His awareness extended not only across physical space, but across probability itself, anticipating outcomes and shaping events to ensure the survival and preservation of what he deemed necessary. In one isolated village, survivors recounted the approach of his forces with fear, yet recognized salvation when it arrived. Children, who had hidden from raiders and alien invaders alike, emerged to see a figure larger than life, radiating authority and judgment. Civilians who had lost everything were given protection, guidance, and order, their survival a testament to a commander whose comprehension of consequences surpassed conventional morality. He acted with unyielding efficiency, balancing destruction with preservation, and in doing so demonstrated a vision that exceeded the comprehension of ordinary mortals. Even as he departed, leaving the world secure and enemy forces annihilated, the imprint of his presence remained. The survivors' understanding of leadership, strategy, and justice had been irrevocably altered. Yet shadows followed him even in victory. Imperial authorities, fearful of his influence, began to enact measures designed to obscure his name and the record of his campaigns. Codices were rewritten, battle reports manipulated, and legions reassigned under fabricated designations. Attempts were made to suppress knowledge of the scale of his victories, to hide the truth of the populations saved, and to erase the strategies that had ensured success. Despite these efforts, fragments persisted. Soldiers remembered, survivors whispered, and the galaxy itself carried subtle signatures of his influence. The lost Primarch's legacy could not be fully contained, for it was not bound to records alone, but to the fundamental consequences of his actions and the irreversible shaping of events across the Imperium. In his solitude after the battle, he contemplated the galaxy and its fragile structure. Empires and fleets, bureaucracy and doctrine, loyalty and rebellion, all were threads in a tapestry he had come to understand more fully than anyone else. His victories had proven the potential of independent judgment, yet they had also revealed the depths of fear and control that the Imperium exerted to maintain its authority. He recognized his existence threatened the very order he had been created to serve, and yet he remained committed to principles greater than obedience, survival, justice, and the preservation of humanity against threats both external and internal. His presence alone carried consequence, and even absent from formal records, he would continue to shape events through both action and the enduring influence on those who had witnessed his power. As he departed from Calor Prime, the battlefield lay in silence, punctuated only by the distant flicker of remaining fires and the faint hum of lingering warp energy. The survivors, soldiers, and observers alike bore witness not to a figure confined by doctrine, but to an existence that defied erasure. The lost Primarch moved among the shadows of history and memory, an enduring force whose actions would ripple across the galaxy, unseen yet undeniable. Worlds had been saved, enemies defeated, and the course of future campaigns forever altered, even as the Imperium labored to obscure the truth. His presence was both a promise and a warning,
The power of one being, wielded with clarity, judgment, and vision, could rewrite outcomes, challenge authority, and illuminate truths that the galaxy prefer remain hidden.